you've obviously copious amounts of publications, and some of your publications talk about cancer as a metabolic disease, and specifically a dysfunction of the mitochondria. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this goes back to the work of Otto Warburg in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, where he defined that cancer originated from damage to mitochondria. And that then elicited a whole series of changes, forcing the cell into a fermentation mechanism to survive. And we have validated and confirmed Warburg's original finding. So in order to do that, what I did was to go through the scientific literature, looking at electron micrographs, the very high magnification of mitochondria in tissues, because you can't see them under light microscopy. In order to look at the structure of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm of the cell, you really need electron microscopy, scanning electron microscopy. And then when you look at, so what I did is I went and I looked at all the major cancers, probably representing 95% of all cancer deaths caused by these kinds of cancers. And I went back through the 50s and 60s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, because in a lot of medical schools, people would be looking at cancer tissue with electron microscopy. And then you go to those papers and you look and see what they found with respect to the number and structure of the mitochondria in those tissues. And invariably, they were abnormal structurally. And even if one were to isolate them and look at the biochemistry, it was abnormal. So we have never found normal mitochondria in any kind of a major cancer. Okay, so if you don't have normal mitochondria, that means the cells are not going to be able to generate energy through normal respiratory systems like oxidative phosphorylation. And this is exactly what Warburg said. He said mitochondria, oxidative phosphorylation, becomes irreversibly damaged in all cancers, regardless of where they come from, thereby forcing them into a fermentation mechanism. And that's what the characteristics of all cancer cells are. They ferment. And then what we did is Warburg knew glucose was the lactic acid fermentation derived from glucose was the major fuel at that time. We have now defined glutamine as a second fermentable fuel. The field had thought for many years that glutamine was being respired. No, it's not respired, it's fermented. So the two fermentation fuels that drive the majority, if not all cancers, are a sugar fermentation and an amino acid fermentation. And without the glucose and glutamine, no cancer cell can survive. So our goal is to scientifically validate fermentation mechanism for a glutamine and show how Warburg was right on his original description, but he also did not have new information which would clarify and resolve this entire cancer issue. And we're in the process of doing this right now.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so what are some of the things that can disrupt the mitochondria to make them precipitate cancer, and how does that go about? I've seen some of you talk about how this actually precipitates the genetic mutations that we see and attribute blame to as a causative, but you're saying that that's actually a knock-on effect.
Yeah, so the mutations are all downstream epiphenomena, as are most of what people are studying today. Are all downstream. The angiogenesis, the failure in apoptosis, and all these kinds of things, they're all downstream of the original damage to the mitochondria. So to answer specifically your question, it's called the oncogenic paradox. And this paradox has perplexed the cancer field for decades. In other words, how is it possible that you could get cancer from a whole range of different kind of insults? What is the common pathophysiological mechanism that could underlie this range of cancer initiators? Like, for example, some people, women may get breast cancer from a clogged milk duct. Another one may get it from some sort of viral infection. Another one may get it from a unhealed wound. There's a whole variety of different ways that could elicit a breast cancer. You can do the same thing. You can consider the same thing for possible colon cancers, or bladder cancers, or lung cancers, or any of these kinds of things. In other words, there's not any one. Of course, smoking would damage the mitochondria in certain lung tissues and possibly other tissues. Intermittent hypoxia, radiation, chronic inflammation, any of these kinds of insults could damage a cell in a particular tissue, damage the mitochondria of a cell in a particular tissue, leading to dysregulated cell growth in that tissue. And the definition of cancer is cell division out of control or dysregulated cell growth. How does that happen? It happens from damage to the mitochondria in a particular cell or populations of cells in a particular tissue, eliciting a growth, a dysregulated growth. And that's the oncogenic paradox. So you don't always get cancer from a single insult. It could come from a variety of insults. The bottom line is that you end up with cells that are dysregulated in their cell growth, all of which are fermenting. And it's important to recognize that the mitochondria of our cells is the controller of the cell cycle. So when that organelle becomes defective, the cell falls back into a dysregulated cycle, leading to, and this is the way all cells on the planet evolved before oxygen came into the atmosphere 2.5 billion years ago. Mm-hmm. We had living cells on the planet before oxygen was in the atmosphere, and they were all fermenting, and they all had dysregulated cell growth. So the cancer cells in bodies are simply falling back on these ancient pathways that have always existed even before respiration, even before the origination of the mitochondria. So the cells are just simply falling back. And as long as they have fermentable fuels in the environment, they're very difficult to kill. Radiation and chemo and all these things that we use are not at the heart of the problem. And as a matter of fact, some of the standards of care actually facilitate the availability of fermentable fuels, making the management of the disease impossible. So that's why the current standard of care makes no sense when one considers the origin of the disease in the concepts of evolutionary biology.
Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia. It's Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code CHAFEE today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Yeah. I did read a study, a number of years ago where it spoke about, when people go into a ketogenic diet, and speaking specifically about using ketosis in order to fight cancer and talk about mitochondria specifically, and showing that when in a state of ketosis, your mitochondria, first of all, were more efficient, and they also increased in number. And so, and it's this sort of mechanism that would protect from cancer. What is it about eating carbohydrates and not being in ketosis that just jams up our mitochondria so much?
Well, I don't think the carbohydrates jam up the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. What happens is excessive amounts of carbohydrates facilitate it causes an inflammatory condition in the body, and it's this elevated inflammation, the state of an inflammation that contributes to the damage. So sugar itself is not a carcinogen. Right. However, chronic consumption of excessive carbohydrates can put the body in an imbalanced nutritional state, and that's what elicits. It's not only cancer. It's type 2 diabetes, it's Alzheimer's disease, it's cardiovascular disease. Essentially, it's all of the major chronic diseases that we are currently suffering from is the result of excessive amounts of carbohydrates in the diet. We as a species did not evolve to eat large amounts of carbohydrates. It was only a seasonal kind of situation. A ripe fruit, a ripe berry, or something like this would be the sweet, maybe honey. It wasn't chronic exposure to high levels of carbohydrates that are coming from the foods that we presently have in our societies. And that is ultimately the origin of the majority of chronic diseases that we have, is a diet that does not fit our evolutionary past.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. And that's something that I've sort of argued for a while now, which is that, the chronic diseases that we're treating nowadays, exactly as you've outlined, are not diseases per se, but, toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet, and a lack of species specific nutrition. And you build up these toxins, as I sort of mentioned to you before we started filming. I got into this when I took cancer biology, and we talked about all the carcinogens. At the time, this was 20 years ago, there was we were told about there's 136 known carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts and over 100 in mushrooms, and so on. So plants obviously using defense chemicals to stop predation or deter predation. This can build up and cause these toxic effects in our body. And
well, let me say that I think that's true for the industrially produced vegetables. I think organic vegetables, if one were to use natural fertilizers, as would be appropriate, I think you can reduce significantly. But the problem is the organic foods are hard to come by. There's no it's not known whether they're really organic or not.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any regulatory commission, of free range animals or organic plants. I mean, this is what we evolved to eat. They were all organic, 50,000 years ago. There was no industrial harvesting of foods. But I think that organically grown vegetables, if one could do that, with natural fertilizers, I think those would be very, very healthy, along with any other free range meat products or things like this. The problem is they're not convenient for the majority of people in the society. A drive up McDonald's hamburger is a hell of a lot easier than going out and shooting a deer in the woods. It's just the way our society is, and our demands on our time and what we do prevent us from actually rebalancing our physiology. But yet we put ourselves at risk for cancer and all these other chronic diseases by the convenience of our lifestyle.
No, and I certainly agree. Like any sort of whole foods approach, you're going to be in much better stead. One of the things that we went through was actually a guy from Berkeley, Professor Bruce Ains, and he published in 1989 some work looking at comparison to alar, which was a pesticide used on apples at the time. They were trying to ban it. And he actually showed that he was looking specifically in mushrooms, that mushrooms had around 10,000 times the amount of natural insecticides and pesticides by weight as the alar would get pumped on these plants, and that it was more likely to cause cancer than natural ones as well. But yeah, 100%. Obviously, pesticides, insecticides, these are toxic by design. They're trying to kill insects from eating them, and so certainly that's going to make things a lot worse. And
well, in my book, I showed that a lot of these carcinogens that you just mentioned, they're taken up in mammalian cells, and they actually cause the mitochondria to fluoresce. They call biofluorescence. So those carcinogens are going right to the mitochondria and damaging the mitochondria, which is then the first step. The first step in the initiation of cancer is to disrupt oxidative phosphorylation. And only cells that can upregulate a fermentation mechanism as the result of this damage can become cancer cells. Cells that cannot upregulate fermentation rarely, if ever, become tumorigenic. Cells of cardiomyocytes, they can't switch from oxphos to fermentation. Neurons in the brain rarely become tumorigenic. It's the glial cells, not the neuron. Neurons can't ferment for very long. So only cells that have the capacity to replace respiration with fermentation can become a cancer cell. Otherwise, you can't do that.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I think that's a good illustration of what the actual mechanism is going on as well.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
it becomes very clear once you understand the biology of the problem, understanding how we get it, and more importantly, understanding how we manage it,
yeah,
becomes very logical. The problem is this information is not known by the majority of oncologists or
yeah,
scientists in the field.
absolutely. And I'm just into that with my sort of endeavors into nutrition and how this affects disease. Even just the idea that diabetes and heart disease are caused by sort of eating a lot of carbohydrates and sugar and all these sorts of things. A lot of people really don't know that, like doctors and nutritionists as well, and they still sort of are on the same cholesterol will kill you sort of idea, which I think has been thoroughly debunked. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys.
Well, it's been debunked, but everybody's popping the statin tablets. Obviously, they still think cholesterol has a big role in cardio. It's triglycerides.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And in the cancer wards, they still give the cancer patients, sugar and Coke and ice cream, cake.
Yeah.
And then they say glucose has nothing to do with cancer. So there's such a lack of knowledge that it's profound. It's cosmic. It's unbelievable. The lack of knowledge on the part of the healthcare industry as to what should and should not be done to keep people healthy.
Yeah, that's one of the things I sort of was I was a bit upset there because I see this every day in the hospital. I see the food that they feed them. It's just sugary carbs. That's it.
Yeah.
And there's almost no meat. There's certainly no fat. There's a bit of dairy, but it's always like chocolate milk as opposed to just normal milk. And the rest of it is just garbage. And I'm going around seeing our brain tumor patients and who just underwent surgery, and here they are eating all this sugary nonsense, and I just can't help but think, like this is what gave you this problem in the first place, and we're just shoveling it into your face.
Yeah, it drives the tumor, and what we also found, I published a major paper on this with the standard of care for brain cancer. The very treatments that are used, the radiation, as well as temozolomide, they free up massive amounts of glucose and glutamine in the tumor microenvironment, making long-term survival very, very rare. So it's the therapies themselves that, in other words, that's bad enough to have a glioblastoma. It's even worse to use standard of care to treat it, because you've more or less signed and sealed the death certificate of this patient simply by the human brain should rarely, if ever, be irradiated. This is nonsense. This has to stop. People, I published a clear paper on how the radiation breaks apart the glutamine glutamate cycle in the brain, freeing up massive amounts of glutamine, and the steroids they give these patients increases blood sugar. The two fuels necessary for causing cancer cells to grow out of control are made available in abundant quantities by the very treatments that we're doing to these patients.
Yeah.
So we have made no advance in glioblastoma therapy in almost 100 years. And my most recent paper shows in 100 years, we have a telescope that now orbits 1 million miles from Earth to look at the very origins of our solar system. This new telescope, I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, and yet we do that, and we've made no advance in glioblastoma.
Yeah.
So and many other cancers. Once you have metastatic lung cancer, a colon cancer, the survival is so much less because the treatments we're using contribute to the demise of these patients. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tragedy. That's actually a tragedy.
Yeah. And chemo can be so hard on people. And
Yeah.
I don't know what people are more concerned with, like getting cancer or getting cancer and realizing that means they need chemo. Because I've had friends and
I-
obviously patients devastated by these
Yeah,
treatments.
I think they fear the treatment as much as they do the disease. They
Yeah.
don't. They think their hair is going to fall out. They're going to bleed from the gums. They're going to be sick and tired all the time. Many people are. Some people recover really well. Actually, there are some reports now that show water-only therapeutic fasting can significantly reduce some of the toxic effects of chemotherapy.
Hmm.
But my point is, why would you want to use chemotherapy when we know we just have to pull the plug on the fermentable fuels with
Yeah.
diet and drugs that are not so toxic, especially when under therapeutic ketosis? I mean, there's a clear framework and strategy for managing cancer without toxicity. The biggest problem is no business model to support this, which
Right.
is the singular greatest inhibitor of moving this forward. There is no way yet that people have found out how to make money
Yeah.
on metabolic therapy. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
It's not the patient
Hmm.
that should be benefited. It's how to make revenue from this. I think the entrepreneur will come and the entrepreneur will figure out how to do this. I'm not that kind of a person. My job is not how do we keep cancer patients alive with a higher quality of life beyond what they were ever predicted to have. They're all very, very prone. They all have to ferment. So, and all the blood cancers are all driven by glutamine. They're in the blood, So you're talking about all the major cancers. Here's the situation. There are reports in the scientific literature